Let's talk some chess. As a general rule of thumb, I like to talk about games that actually happened on this channel, but I'm going to make an exception today because we're talking about the Immortal Dream game. This game was played, if you can call it that, in 1961. The famous chess player David Bronstein dreamed this game in the middle of the night. He woke up, he wrote this game down, and shared it with the rest of the world. So the game was not actually played between two human players. It was just sort of thought up during a dream or nightmare, whatever way you want to put it, of a dreaming chess player's mind. But this is just so kind of a cool story behind the game. Doesn't really matter for our purposes. It's a beautiful game and really fun to look at and analyze, but kind of cool to know the story behind it. So this is Bronstein versus Bronstein, essentially, and Bronstein starts off with d4. We have knight to f6, c4, e6, and knight to c3. This is a very common opening, and here bishop to b4 just pins the knight to the king, and the natural response is bishop to g5, pinning the knight to the queen. So both dark square bishops are pinning the opposing knight to either the king or the queen, and this is still played, in this variation today. We have h6, so threatening the bishop, wants to kick it off the line of this pin, and the bishop here just retreats to h4, maintaining the pin of the knight. And here, if you're playing with the black pieces, you have to decide, do I want to play g5, which is very aggressive, really forcing the bishop off of this diagonal, but perhaps onto a nicer diagonal. And also, this g5 move will just really disrupt the king's, the three king's pawns. So instead, here, black just plays queen to e7, preparing to evacuate the queen and break this pin. Here, white plays knight to f3, and here is sort of the crucial idea that kicks everything in motion. Black plays d6, and this d6 move, slowly building in the center, another development square for the knight and the bishop, and potentially the queen if the queen wants to escape. But with the problem, and I say problem in quotes, is that this move allows queen to a4 by white. And this obviously comes with check, and the issue, or what seems like the issue, is that it's forking the king and the bishop. So if you just block with a pawn, of course, then queen takes bishop, and white is up a piece. So the most natural way to defend is knight to c6, blocking the check of the queen and protecting the bishop. But this looks like just a temporary fix, because white has this d5 move, and after e takes on d5, c takes on d5, now you've got a pawn attacking the knight is pinned to the king, the queen is attacking the bishop, and this looks like really difficult to defend and figure out how to stop. If you play an automatic move like bishop to d7, then you just get d takes on c6, and now both bishops are hanging, and now you've lost two pieces, and that's no fun. So there's one move in this position that actually keeps or maintains a positional advantage for black. So see if you can stop the video for a second and find it while I give you a moment. Okay, so this is the move that black has to see before playing this d6 move, and the move is queen to e4. And this is an awesome move. First, it looks like a queen sacrifice. The knight is taking the queen, but of course the knight can't do that because it's pinned by the bishop to the king. So making use of this pin, which is always a nice idea. And this queen on e4 is doing a couple of things. First of all, it's attacking the bishop on h4, even though the bishop is defended by the knight on f3. So it's not really threatening to take the bishop, but it is attacking it, which sort of pins the knight onto f3. But it's doing a lot in defense. So let's see what happens if white goes ahead and tries to take some pieces. So I think the most natural is, obviously you're not going to take with the queen, because then pawn takes back, and now you're of course not going to take the queen, with the queen on b4, because then knight or queen takes back. But what about this pawn takes on c6? This looks totally fine, right? I mean, you've taken the pawn, maybe, black takes back with the queen, but then you just trade queens, and that's okay. But that's not what happens. After the pawn takes the knight on c6, then black plays bishop to c3, checking the king, and all of a sudden you've opened up this attack, this discovered attack from the black queen to the white queen. So after the pawn takes the after the pawn takes the bishop, queen takes queen, and black is just completely winning. Black is up a queen for a bishop, and this is totally fine. So that's the main idea behind this queen to e4 move, is that you're protecting the bishop, sort of, but really you're threatening this discovered check with the bishop taking the knight on c3. So now the dreams of capturing multiple pieces for white are not going to work. So here, white plays this knight to d2 move, and this move essentially attacks the queen. This move accomplishes a couple of things as well. It attacks the queen on e4, and it also breaks the pin of the bishop to the knight on c3. So now, if pawn takes, right? Ooh. now let me make a silly move. Now if pawn takes, then black does not have this bishop to c3 with check because there's a knight blocking on d2, and now queen can just take queen, and that doesn't work. So a nice move here by white to attack the queen and block this pin. The problem is you've also left the bishop undefended on h4, and the queen, oh sorry, went into a separate line, and the queen just takes the bishop on h4, because remember, this knight was guarding the bishop, and now that the knight's on d2, the bishop is undefended, and the queen takes it away. So this is a way for black to sort of equalize material. And now you have this pawn takes on c6, and again, like I mentioned, if the bishop takes on c3, then it doesn't come with check, so you don't have this queen takes queen move. So instead here, black plays castles kingside, obviously just getting the king out of this pin. So now, this is very dangerous looking. Pawn taking on b7 with a discovered check from the queen. Black just wants to castle the king and be safe. And remember that we talked about that g5 move. This would be very bad if you had a pawn on g5 in this position, because you'd have no protection around the king. So everything worked out. There's no more dark squared bishop on the board. The queen captured it. And these pawns are, while I prefer for this pawn to be on h7, these pawns are doing a good job defending the king. So now we have a4 by white, threatening the bishop on b4. But instead of dealing with that threat, Bronstein versus Bronstein again, Bronstein puts the knight on g4, and now this is a threat that you have to deal with because the knight and the queen are eyeing this f2 square. So white plays the very natural move, g3, attacking the queen and blocking this square. And this looks like it's a mistake, right? It looks like it's a mistake for black because now the queen is hanging to the pawn and the bishop is hanging to the pawn. So it looks like you've just completely lost a piece. But once again, maybe this is why this is the dream game. It seems like black is losing a piece, but black has this queen to f6 move. This isn't as dramatic because maybe an easier move to find, but you basically maintain the pressure on f2 while moving the queen to safety. And again, this is a threat that white has to deal with. But actually in this position, white does not deal with the threat. The proper move here is to put knight d on e4, attacking the queen and protecting this f2 pawn. So this is the right idea. And you can't just push d5 to kick this knight because then knight takes back. Actually, no, I'm sorry. That was really silly. You can't just play d5. The knight can't take back because it's pinned, of course, but then you just have knight takes queen with check, and that's even better. So sorry about that. Ignore me. That's why I shouldn't analyze lines on the fly. So anyways, this is the proper move. But here in the dream, Bronstein says to Bronstein, I'm not worried about this threat. I can deal with it. I'm going to take this bishop off the board, and does, with pawn takes on b4. But now the position has essentially completely fallen apart, and the game is essentially over. And it starts in a very intuitive way with this queen takes on f2. This of course comes with check. The queen is protected by the knight, so the king cannot capture the queen back. Only move is king to d1. But now so this, I think, like, again, if I were to get into the mind of the player with the white pieces, which is Bronstein playing against Bronstein, I think it's hard to see how the attack continues after this position, right? So maybe you're thinking knight e3, but then the king can sort of just run away. Don't want to give it away. King can just run away to c1, right? So basically, I think you only take the bishop on b4 if you're not really worried about queen takes on f2 check. And it's reasonable because it's kind of hard to see how the attack continues for black. So take a second for the last time and see if you can find how to continue this attack and really essentially finish the game with the black pieces. Okay, I sort of gave it away. Hopefully you weren't watching too closely. But the move here, and it's a really surprising move. It's from a piece that you never would expect to really move in this position, is, that's not what I want to do. Yeah, after the king moves, it is b5. There's no en passant here because the pawn would have to be on the 5th rank for there to be en passant, so that you don't have to worry about that. And this is an awesome move. This is a, again, you were probably looking at, in this position, you're probably looking at these pieces to sort of move and continue the attack. You probably weren't expecting the pawn to move on b5. And the idea behind this move is you want to deflect this queen from guarding this really important diagonal. And that diagonal will be extremely important, as we're going to see. And the queen doesn't really have many squares to move to protect this diagonal. And we'll talk about why this diagonal is so important when we see the attack sort of unfold. So here white is forced to play queen to b3. You can't, again, just assume we want to stay on this diagonal for now. We can't play queen to c2 because then you get knight to e3, and this just forks the king and queen. I think there's even a mate here. I forget if I did this, but there might even be a mate here, but either way you're getting the queen, so that's great. So the queen instead comes to b3, but now you get the sort of the crushing move, bishop developing to e6. Now all the pieces are developed, which is great, and this comes with the tempo. You're attacking the queen on b3. And now there are no more squares on this diagonal for the queen to move to protect the sort of the crucial squares in this position, so the game is essentially over, and we'll see why that happens. But the Stockfish wants you to just, you know, sacrifice the queen and then be down a ton of material. But let's sort of see what happens if you don't do that. So let's say here white tries to move the queen. This is what happened in the dream game. White moves the queen to a3, so now off of this critical diagonal. What happens now that the queen is not on this diagonal? Well, now you get this knight to e3, and this comes with check. And here, you know, the only square that the king can move to is c1, because the knight is covering this square, the queen is covering this square. So the king moves to c1, and now you get queen to e1 check. And now you can start to see why it's super important for the queen to be on, the white queen to be on this diagonal, because if the white queen, for example, let's say the white queen is on b3 and there's no bishop attacking it, then can I do that? Let me see if I can do that. So let's say here white just, or let's say in this position black went for the attack and played queen to e1 check, king moves to c1. I'm sorry, that's not what I want to do. Silly me. Knight to e3 check, king moves to c1, queen to e1 check. Now, in this position, you can defend because you can put the knight on d1, and the queen and the king are protecting the knight, whereas the black knight and the black queen are attacking it. So this is actually totally fine. You can defend this position because you have two pieces sort of, defending this knight. But the problem is, as soon as the queen moves off this diagonal, then there's only going to be one piece defending the d1 square, or the potential knight on the d1 square, so that doesn't work. So after the king moves and the queen moves to e1, now this knight to d1 move, which was played in the dream game, now this move doesn't work because it just runs into queen takes on d1, and this, of course, is checkmate. And again, if the white queen was on this diagonal, then it would be protecting the knight, and the black queen couldn't take it, but it's not. So queen takes knight. This is checkmate, of course, because the queen is checking the king, obviously. The knight is protecting the queen, and the king can't move to b2 because there is a pawn in the way. So just an awesome finish. Again, this pawn and this bishop are not involved in the final checkmate. They were just there to sort of kick the queen from this important diagonal and not allow the knight and the queen to team up and deliver a checkmate. So, is it real? Is it not real? You can debate that, but just an awesome game, and appreciative that David Bronstein shared this game that he dreamed up with us, because it is a fun. There are a couple of fun positions where you think, black has lost a piece, but there's a move that saves a piece, and then there's a really nice combination and a really nice deflection with this b5 move to get the attack going. So, thank you for watching. Drop a like, drop a subscribe, leave a comment if you want to see any games, or if there's anything in particular you want to see more of, and we'll see you next time.